Hello everybody and welcome to another quick Dwarf Fortress tutorial. In this video I'm going to be talking about siege weapons and siege workshops, making siege weapons, and what they can be used for, and the places that they are useful, as well as some demonstrations on how to train them safely. So, in order to do this, we're going to need a siege workshop, which is one of the larger workshops in the game, same size as a trading depot, but as you can see, I already have one constructed right here. They simply use 3 blocks or pieces of your choice in order to be constructed. But once the item itself is constructed, you can then select it. Now, you can of course use the manager screen for this if you have the manager noble assigned right here, and they are also assigned to a chair. So then you could use the manager job screen by simply opening up the work orders menu and clicking this and then assigning the jobs here. But what we're going to be doing for this video is we're going to be assigning them at the siege workshop. So in order to make siege weapons, you need to make parts for them. Now, there are 2 types of siege weapons in Dwarf Fortress. There are catapults and ballista. Catapults fire boulders in a straight line on kind of an arc, sort of, which means they can sometimes hit the ceiling. They can destroy trees, oddly enough, and are not capable of friendly fire, making them quite useful for training. Versus ballista, which do have friendly fire, don't destroy trees, and are extremely dangerous to your dwarves. Now, we're going to be assembling some parts for both, and then I'm going to be constructing them, one of each, and kind of showing you what they're used for. So first, we are going to be constructing ballista parts. So as you can see, it's not going to filter down until I type in parts, at which point then I can type in ballista parts. And we do need 3 of these in order to construct a ballista. As you can see down here, we do have some nether cap ballista parts. You can make them out of either adamantine or out of wood. So we're going to be making 3 ballista parts, and we're also going to be making catapult parts. So I'm going to input 3 of these of each, and then once they are constructed, I will get to constructing these items. Now, the second part of this is we're going to need arrowheads for our ballista arrows. Now, in order to make these, we're going to need a forge of some kind. I have a lava forge here, but you can, of course, use any kind of metalsmithing industry. Any metal that can be made into a weapon can be made into a piece of ballista arrow. So what we're going to need is we're going to be needing to make ballista arrowheads. So we're going to go to siege equipment underneath the magma forge. Now, remember, of course, you could do this in the manager screen as well to automate this process. We're going to go down to copper because that's what we have a surplus of, and we are going to queue up some copper ballista arrowheads. Now that all of our ballista and catapult parts are completed, the next thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to assemble a ballista arrow. So you do this by simply typing in assemble, and then the material that you want, copper in this instance, and then arrow, and then clicking the priority thing. We'll just set this as repeating so they'll go through the ballista arrows that we need to have made. Next, we're going to be constructing one of each type of the siege equipment. So we're going to be going to the military section of the screen, and we're going to be placing a catapult. I'm just going to use closest material so that they just simply use the ones that we just made. And then I'm going to place this. Now, once it's constructed, we will be able to orient it in whatever direction we see fit. Now, remember, catapults only fire boulders. I would kind of compare catapults to a similar to a stonefall trap, right? And I would compare the ballista more to a weapon trap. So the ballista are much more effective at actually dealing with enemies, whereas the catapults only fire a boulder and are quite good at making things dodge out of the way, but maybe not the most effective at actually removing them from the scene here. So since we have the pieces for both of these, I'm going to construct a ballista and a catapult, and we're going to fire off both, and I'm going to talk about some use cases for each. And now that our 2 siege weapons are getting finished up here, we can now take a look at their UI themselves. So once they are constructed, you can set their orientation in either north, south, east, or west, and this goes for both of those. It's exactly the same UX here. Then we have 3 nifty little buttons. Now, the first one is prepare to fire. So they will go grab the ammunition for this particular here weapon, and they will prepare to fire. Then there's not in use, where if they prepared to fire and they've already loaded the ammunition, you can then set it to not in use, and they will then leave the ammunition there ready to fire. And then there is lastly, which is fire at will, which is go grab ammunition, put it into the item, and fire. And don't worry about that. That's simply some forgotten beast dealing with some friends down in the basement. They'll be fine, I'm sure. Over here, we're just going to set both of these to prepare to fire and just wait for them to bring some ammo over. Now we're going to talk about some kind of use cases for these 2. As I said earlier, the catapults don't have friendly fire, which means you can kind of have some pretty hysterical situations just like firing these things through a tavern or something. However, it does make them quite useful as training for the ballista. Now, the ballista, on the other hand, need a specific firing range to use. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Now, over here, if you wish to fire off ballista and use them for training, it's best to have a setup similar to this, where you have a locked-off space so that while the ballista arrows themselves are traveling, they cannot collide with your dwarves. Now, when they're falling down here, they are safe to pick up, so they're not going to damage Eusteth or Alath or Urist or whoever it collides next to. So you can fire these off pretty safely, and they can land down on a lower Z level. As long as they're not picking them up on the same level, your dwarves will be fine. So I like to make them a little bit further down and just fire it at a wall and through a spot where the dwarves can't get to, just so that there is no risk of somebody getting impaled. But now for some use cases. So now that we've talked about training use cases, what about the actual defense setups? So in my experience, catapults are useful in a situation where you want to use siege equipment, but you do not have access to metals or easy access to large amounts of ballista ammunition. As we were speaking about earlier, you do need both wood and you need arrowheads to make ballista arrows. So because you need both arrows and arrowheads, or wood and arrowheads to make ballista arrows, it is possible you could be in a situation where you only have catapults as your only form of defense. Whereas with ballista, it requires more putting things together to get stuff going. So catapults, in my experience, are useful for knocking things off of large ledges. Maybe you have a volcano on your fortress or a large cliff, or you've simply dug a tunnel down to a cavern layer and would like to watch things go wee splat. Well, the best way to do that is to just simply fire a bunch of rocks at them. You don't need to worry about friendly fire, so you can just fire them over top of your own dwarves' heads through a fortification or two, and as long as they're about 10 or so tiles away from the enemy, they are not going to freak out upon seeing these. Whereas those little critters down in the basement getting shredded by whatever monstrosity is down there are definitely a non-issue here. So that's kind of my use case for the catapult, is simply knocking things out of the way or using them as defense. Whereas the ballistas can be used for anything from simply impaling large amounts of enemies all the way down to besieging the underworld if you know how to find it. That is all I really have to say about catapults and ballista, and this is, man, these tutorials have gotten a little bit sparse over the last couple of months because I've kind of tutorialized everything that I've wanted to. I'm just kind of cleaning up around the edges when I feel like making one at this point. If you would like to support this channel directly, check out the Patreon, and if you want to watch me play video games live, go to twitch.tv/BLINDIRL. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.